So welcome everybody. Really glad to have you here. And a special lunchtime edition of the Agile Learning Labs Scrum Professionals Meetup. And I am just absolutely thrilled to have Alicia R. McLean with us today, the organizational whisperer. I love that. I love that tagline. So in getting to know Alicia, I found they've been doing kind of agile coaching work since 2006. Their very first foray into this space came when they were doing some work related to the Department of Defense, which is kind of amazing that there was anybody doing work for the Department of Defense in 2006 who was like into this agile stuff. I love that. We have a shared kind of mutual friend and professional connection with Carlton Nettleton. Some of you here will know Carlton. Carlton actually did some work with Agile Learning Labs way back in the day. So I have a warm spot in my heart for Carlton. 2015, Alicia went solo, and she's an Agile coach, and her expertise is very much in the transformation of people and systems. And she focuses on building mental fitness and organizational resilience, which is super cool. This is actually her third time being an entrepreneur. And based on that experience, besides doing her cool Agile coaching stuff, she's got a little side thing she does, or I don't know if it's a side thing, but it's cool, which is she did a video series called the Top 10 Small Business Health Check video series, which is kind of a cool thing. And random interesting fact, Alicia's been RVing full time for the last 3 years. So without any further ado, I'm gonna be quiet and turn it over to Alicia. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Super excited to be here, super excited to meet you all, and I'm loving all the diversity I'm seeing in this group. I lead a group called the Agile Coaching Exchange, and we have monthly meetups as well, and I'm always just appreciating seeing all the diversity that comes into this space, into the Agile space. I've been in software development and IT for a number of years, and oftentimes I feel like I'm the only one in the room that represents either a different a racial background or cultural background. And so I'm just really happy to see all the diversity in the room here. So I hope you had an interesting chat in the breakout room. What an interesting way to come into a meetup like this. Anybody want to comment on anything that you might have noticed for yourself when you got in your own way around Agile transformation work? Anybody want to comment on that? Anybody want to share? You could put it in the chat. You can come off mute. Do we do that?
I'll share.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
So my insight is getting in my own way is because I have not found my own way. And I shared that I was talking with an organization yesterday, and they believe in truth, trust, and candor. And so then we got into talking in our breakout about, psychological safety. And, you can't have psychological safety, unless people are comfortable with candor. And that takes a certain type of leadership and a very deft skill in dealing with leadership who is not quite there or anywhere near there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, thank you for that, Karen. You mentioned a really important point. Part of the reason why we can't find our own way, or we're having a struggle getting in our own way, is because we can't find our own way. And one of the things that we'll talk about in this session is one of the ways that we find our way is for us to get to know who we are, as human beings. This is really what this is about. So let's dive in with that. So the title of this is, are you sabotaging your own client's Agile transformation? And so what we're going to take a look at in this session is what are the ways that this could be happening for ourselves. So thank you, Chris, for the fabulous introduction. I appreciate that. Folks, I am, again, very excited to be here. I've been around in the coaching space, the Agile coaching space, since 2006. But one of the things that I realized very early, well, did I realize this early on? Not really, actually about halfway through my journey as an Agile coach, that if you look at this competency model here, one of the things that I was missing was this idea of the professional coaching wedge. I just had a glaring hole in my competency. And this was around the 2014 timeframe. I teaching, mentoring, facilitation, and transformation mastery, all that was great. But the professional coaching thing was lacking. And so that's where I really began to dig in. And that's what brings me to today, where I'm a certified a positive intelligence coach, where we focus on mental fitness and positive intelligence. I'm also an ICF coach at the PCC level. And so this really digs into the human experience around change, which is what we all need to be aware of if we're going to be doing any kind of work in Agile transformation. So I'm going to take a moment here just to get grounded and centered. And if you're with me, join me. And we're going to do this for about a second or so. This is a picture that I recently took at the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta. We spent some time there just on our journey. As Chris said, my wife and I are full-time RVers. We've been on the road for about 3 years, hang out mostly on the West. Next year, we're doing Route 66. But this is from the Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta. And so one thing we're going to do really quickly to get present and grounded is to just, if you'll follow along here, you can just join me in this. So what I'd like for you to do is just close your eyes if that's available to you. If you're seated, notice the weight of yourself on your seat. If you are standing, you could just notice the weight of yourself on your feet. Take a moment to drop your shoulders, unclench your jaw and drop your tongue. And then you could put your two palms together in a kind of like in a prayer position where you notice both of the palms touching together. You're noticing where the palms are touching and where the palms are not touching. Take a moment to just rub the fingertips of one hand down to the base of the palm of the other hand and back up to the top. We'll do that again on the other side, rubbing those fingertips down to the base of the palm and up to the top. It kind of looks like you're rubbing your hands together. You're going to just keep doing this for another second or so. But what you're noticing is what you're rolling over with your fingertips, the muscles in your hand, the ridges on your fingers, rings, calluses, whatever that is. No judgment, just noticing. I'll talk more about what this is when we get to this point in the presentation, but this is a way to just calm the mind chatter and get everybody present. Do this for about 10 seconds. All right, go ahead and open your eyes and come on back in. I actually start all of my training classes with this because I recognize people are just running in from wherever they're running in from. Mind chatter is just all over the place and they can't get present and grounded. I've also found that in doing this, people remember more of the content because their mind is calm when they come into the session. All right, let's dive in. What are we going to talk about here? Positive intelligence. We'll talk a little bit about foundations. We'll talk about the core muscles that you need to build mental fitness, and just the impact that change has on people. Steps to building agility and resilience, perspective shifting, and then we'll wrap it up. So how many of you have heard of positive intelligence? Did anybody, thumbs up if you've heard of positive intelligence before? Thumbs up, okay, a couple of people. Let me see where are my participants here so I can see my participant window. Yeah, okay. And so did anybody take the assessment? Because I didn't get any emails, so nobody took the assessment. Okay, so a couple people took the assessment. Good for you. Good for you. Great to meet our saboteurs, isn't it? This is really good information to have because this is kind of that journey towards getting to know yourself better. And if you didn't get a chance to take the assessment, I'll drop a link to it. So don't worry, you can still do that. All right, so what do we mean by positive intelligence and mental fitness? It's really your capacity to respond to whatever's in front of you with a positive spin on it as opposed to negativity bias. And this is not about toxic positivity where you clench your jaw and you have your teeth clenched and you're like everything's fine. It's not that. This is a true reshaping of your perspective to where you actually can see possibilities. You can see what you can't see when your mind is shut down from negativity bias. And so the impact of this is stronger performance, just better overall wellness, and then just really the ability to have healthier relationships with yourself and with others. And so, where does this concept of the saboteur come from? And where does this idea of the mind chatter that we all have, where does this stuff come from? It's so annoying. This is actually part of our original feature set, right? So, we have a left brain and a right brain. And this left brain's job is to keep us safe. Its job is about survival. And it's to look at every single thing that we see and put just a negative spin on it because we might have to run. This could be a saber-toothed tiger. I got to be ready, right? And so because of this original feature set, this is kind of how we're wired. Now, the challenge with this is that we're probably in our fullest expression of who we are as humans, our fullest essence, when we're about 5 years old. And then after 5 years old, that's when all the mind chatter and the negativity bias gets louder and stronger and louder and stronger and louder and stronger. And so a way to combat this is to understand what's happening there so that we can turn the volume down with it. There's going to be a couple of QR codes in this presentation, so you're welcome to just whip your phone up there and grab that QR code. This is actually the one to the book, The Foundation of This Work in Positive Intelligence and Mental Fitness. The foundation research for positive intelligence, mental fitness is in these 4 categories. So if you know anything about positive psychology or performance science or cognitive behavioral psychology, neuroscience, if you know anything about any of these disciplines, these all contribute to the work of positive intelligence. And so once you dig in, you'll see, elements of that as you move along in the work. So let's talk about this idea of the factor analysis that was mentioned on the previous page, where all the work is synthesized down to the fact that we have these 9 patterns of thinking. Actually, it's 10, including the judge. 9 patterns of thinking. And then we have 3 core muscles to build to turn the mind chatter down so that it's not all this sort of cacophony of noise. The first muscle to build your mental fitness is called saboteur interceptor. Can I recognize that the thought that I'm having is mind chatter? I was coaching a person yesterday, and she was kind of at a decision point, and she's like, I don't know if this is my intuition talking or if this is my saboteur talking. How do I know the difference? Well, the way that we know the difference is by checking in on the emotion that we're having. If we're having a negative emotion, then you're in saboteur. And so, but if you can't recognize the chatter, then you don't really know. And so by taking the assessment, for any of you who are open to doing that, or for those of you who did take the assessment, you actually get a description of your top 3 saboteurs. So you can see what it says, you can recognize that mind chatter. So important. The second one is self-command. Once I notice the mind chatter, now what do I do with myself? I don't just sit there and get whipped around by it. I actually need a way to turn the volume down on it. And that's our second thing here, self-command. Self-command is about being able to create some space for yourself, turn the mind chatter down so that you can create some space. We do that with mindfulness. That first activity that we did at the start of our session with the palms together, that is a self-command activity. The third thing is the sage muscle. Now, how can I shift my perspective? I see this horrible thing in front of me, or this thing that I'm calling horrible. How can I now shift my perspective? And that's the sage muscle. We'll talk about all of this, but I just want to give you a quick overview of it. All right. How many of you have ever heard of the inner critic? Inner critic? Yeah, we've all heard of that, right? Well, guess what? Your inner critic is a jerk. And it's a loud jerk. And we all have this thought habit and this pattern. The thing that's different about the judge, though, in this work around positive intelligence is it's not just let me pick up the rubber hose and whip myself in the head and say horrible things to myself. The judge is expanded to not just self, but others and circumstances. So let's just use a quick example. So I'm a scrum master. I'm a new scrum master coming into a team, and I come in there and I have imposter syndrome because I've never done this before and I never even heard of a scrum master. So I'm coming into this job and I've got mind chatter that says, Who do you think you are? You don't even know anything about this stuff. And you know what? You've never even been a developer before. So that's the mind chatter that you bring. And then you come into the team and they're not doing what you want them to do. And so now they're a bunch of jerks, right? So that's the others. So it's self and then others. And then let's talk about the circumstances. The judge also finds fault with circumstances. What kind of company is doing this kind of, what is happening here? So that's the structure of the judge. Self, beat myself in the head, others, all the rest of you are jerks. And then circumstances, this whole company has a problem, right? So this is the mind chatter we need to look out for. When we're in negative emotion, we're in saboteur. And so part of this is to be aware of your emotions. I spend a lot of time with my clients helping them to become more acquainted to their own emotions. If you have a high hyper rational in your top three, if you took the assessment and you have a high hyper rational, or if you have a high avoider, those two saboteurs can be the type, the flavor of saboteur, if you will, that doesn't always connect with their emotions. And so emotional literacy is super important. I'll drop a link for that into the chat so that you can have a resource for that. And if I forget to do it before the end of the call, I'm sure Chris will remind me, or Betty or Susan will remind me to do that. So the judge, that's the first. And I call this the master saboteur. I also call this the first responder because when the event happens, the judge is the first one there to say, oh, this is awful. This is terrible. How could this be happening? And then the rest of them are called accomplice saboteurs. So let's look at how this impacts our agile transformation as coaches and team coaches and organizational coaches. Let's look at the impact of that, and then we'll take another look at those accomplice saboteurs. So I don't know if this is something that I don't think is super obvious, but any kind of change can evoke a fear response in people. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're getting married, if you're going to have a baby, if you're going to change your whole organization, if you're going to go on vacation, if you haven't been on vacation in a while, it doesn't actually matter what it is. It can trigger a bit of a fear response for us. And so we just need to know that when we come in as coaches, we can't assume that everybody's hunky-dory with what's happening. And even if they say they're hunky-dory, they might be displaying some behaviors that actually are to the contrary of that. And so just knowing that any kind of change can evoke a fear response for any human is something really important to know. And people can have a couple different ways that they respond to this change. Has anybody seen anybody like this when you come in with agile transformation? No, go away with that. Or they're hiding under the desk. There's all kinds of fear responses we can have. Has anybody seen anything else in terms of a fear response? You can put it in the chat. You can come off mute. Anything else that you've seen as a fear response that says, I'm not ready for this?
Just people explaining why it can't work.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one. That won't work here. Or we don't do this here. We've always done this that way. Exactly. Yeah, that's basically a fear response. And what can typically happen for us as Scrum Masters or Agile coaches, now we have a triggered response. Because one thing I haven't mentioned so far is that we're all connected, folks. And so when someone else comes with a triggered response, it can also be very triggering for us. It's like if I was to let out a big old yawn right now in the middle of this presentation, I know someone else is going to catch that yawn. We're all connected. It's called mirror neurons. And so when someone comes with a triggered response, we have to be aware of our own emotion and our own propensity to be triggered by somebody else's negative emotion. So if you see somebody with their hand up or they're under the desk or they're telling you we're already agile, whatever the thing is, I just yawned. Thank you, Chris. I just mentioned yawn and Chris is yawning. Right? So this is what can happen. This is absolutely what can happen. We're all connected. And it's just not something that we were really conscious of. And so when we come in as agile coaches, we want to be really sensitive to that. So here are our accomplished saboteurs. These are the 9, I call them thought habits and patterns. And if you had a chance to take the assessment, you might see something from your top 3. You might see something here that's even circled. So this is an example of a client that I've been working with for a whole year. This is the sponsor group that brought us in to do this work. And they all 3, because very important at the executive level, at the sponsor level, people that are sponsoring this work, for them to be aware of how they're showing up in this transformation. And so this is what we see as the outcome of this leadership team. I think there was 13 people on this team. And so we see we have a few hyperachievers, we've got several sticklers, we've got hyper rational, we've got controller. And so this was the leadership team, and this was their number 1 saboteur. They had a top 3, but this was their number 1 saboteur that we uncovered when they took the assessment. So if you didn't get a chance to see the assessment information, and I don't want to put it in here now because I don't want you to run off and go take it while we're in the presentation, but I will post it after. You want to know what's happening for yourself. What's in your top 3? Really want to know that. And so again, this is our saboteur interceptor muscle, as you can see up here in the right-hand corner. So this is really interesting too, because so the first one tells you the ranking of your saboteurs. So there's 9 saboteurs, you'll get your ranking. And what we saw on the previous slide was an example of a client and their ranking for their leadership team. This is actually showing what their current state of positive intelligence and mental fitness is. You get a numeric score for this, and it tells you, do you have a greater percentage of saboteur interference in your thinking versus sage involvement in your thinking. Sage just comes from the right-hand side of our brain, where we can see possibilities, where we can see ease, where we experience ease and flow. It's kind of like, well, maybe that's a little bit edgy, but I was going to say it's kind of like if you were on psilocybin, you would be out of your right-hand brain. But we're so trapped in our left-hand brain, it's so hard to get to this part of our brain. But you can do it through legal methods like positive intelligence and mental fitness. You don't have to use psilocybin, ayahuasca, whatever. I mean, there's no judgment about that. It's just that this is probably more acceptable in the corporate space. So what we see from our leadership team here is that most of the people are below the tipping point, which means they have a higher sabotaging or saboteur influence in their interactions. So that means that they're basically leading through fear. And so fear is going to cause us to have different kinds of behaviors that may not contribute to the outcomes that we're looking for in our agile transformation. And so this was super interesting and super illuminating for this leadership team. And so I actually, after them all taking the assessment and us having this sort of overview, I had an opportunity to coach the entire leadership team in one-on-one coaching so that they can kind of get themselves ready for what was coming up in their organization. All right. I love these next 2 slides because if you had a chance to take the assessment, what you'll see here is for your saboteur, if you're a leader that's part of the agile transformation, this is the way, these are the behaviors that you might see if these are your saboteurs. So here's an example. I'll just show you mine. My top 3, let me see if I can get my annotate here. Okay. So my top 3 saboteurs are restless. Oopsie, come on. Is it going to let me write? Oh, here we go. Restless is in my top 3. Hyper rational is in my top 3. And hyper achiever is in my top 3. And so when I see behaviors like this for myself, I can know that I'm having a saboteur reaction to this transformation or change or whatever's happening. You'll see, this is why I invited folks to take the assessment ahead of time so that you could kind of see for you. So anybody that took the assessment, do you see anything here that looks familiar for yourself? Anybody that took the assessment? See anything here that looks familiar?
Oh yeah, my top 3, I can share mine.
Okay.
I'm a stickler, I'm restless, and I'm hyper vigilant. So I think you and I got the hyper vigilant part.
Okay. So you had restless, you have stickler. And was it
And
hyper vigilant or hyper?
Yes, hyper vigilant.
Okay, and hyper vigilant. Okay. So one thing I want to share with all of you about this concept, and this is something that is very common in the way that we refer to these things. So these thought habits and patterns are part of who we are, part of our thinking. Part of our thinking is a thought habit and a pattern. It's not who we are. So just like I have an arm, a leg, a gallbladder, and an eyeball, I also have a hyper rational, a restless, and a hyperachiever. I don't refer to myself as my hyperachiever. I don't refer to myself as my restless. So we want to be careful about saying I am a hyper rational. I am a stickler. I am a pleaser. It's I have. It's not who we are. It's a data point. And so it's important for us to understand that because all we're doing is reinforcing the sabotaging side of things when we identify with it. Anybody else want to share? Thank you, Anu. Anybody else want to share what you see? Did you take the assessment? Or even if you didn't take the assessment, is there a behavior here that where you're like, I think I've done that, or I think I resemble that behavior? Anybody see anything here that looks familiar? All right. Thank you, Anu. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. And so one other thing I'll say about that's not in the book. It's not going to be in this presentation really. And the only way you can get it is from your coach when you're working with a positive intelligence coach. This is one side of the thought habit and pattern. There's actually a positive side to it. So think about it this way. If you're a hyperachiever or you have a hyperachiever in your top three, the positive side of this or the sage side of this is achiever. All of these saboteur patterns of thinking are strengths that are in overuse. They are strengths that get kicked off by fear. Fear is basically the emotion. You can call it disappointment, frustration, anger, whatever. What's root is fear. And you can call it whatever you want to, but it's fear that's underneath it. And that's the thing that kind of kicks off these thought habits and patterns. All right, let's look at the behavior of those who are participating in agile transformation and how they might be showing up. So here we see the avoider, controller. We see the same list, but their behaviors are a little different. There's a difference between those leading and those that are participating in this and how they might be showing up. See anything here that looks familiar? I can't imagine that you haven't seen some of this on the teams that you're working with when they're going through agile transformation. Anything that you notice here that looks familiar?
I mean, these archetypes, both in the previous and this one, are pretty familiar, right? It's like, I'm like, oh yeah, I worked with that person. Oh yeah.
Right, they're on my team. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like you have your top three when you take your assessment, so does everybody else. If you've got a left brain and a right brain, you've got these thought habits and patterns. And it's just important to know which ones are your top three. And you can identify this behavior and you can say, well, gee, I got this person on my team. Yeah. Anybody else see anything here that you've got a coworker here. You might even have a family member. Behavior of a family member that you recognize, right? And with the holidays coming up, this is so interesting to look at this through the holiday lens too, because when you get everybody together for the holiday, you could just start picking out, okay, because once you understand this stuff about yourself, you can see, I always call it the suffering. This is our suffering. You can see the suffering of other people, right? You know your top three, someone else has their top three too, and depending on the behavior, you can see that. All right, let's keep going. So the way that we kind of get out of the prison of our own thinking is through this concept called neuroplasticity. And it's our ability to it's our ability to basically reroute let me just get my little drawing tool here. It's our ability to sort of reroute, instead of going off to the saboteur side of the brain, we actually can, again, really reframe our whole experience in a way where we can, um, see possibilities and have stronger outcomes. And so we do this through the habit formation. We build habits to, at the fork in the road where we see the event happening, shift our perspective. Saboteur is this is bad. The sage perspective is This event could be a gift. Now, there are certain things that happen in life where it's not immediate, where it's not immediate what the gift might be. But the reality is when we can shift our perspective, even though we might still be having a negative reaction to it, we can see more possibilities and find our way out of that challenge, whatever it is. And in doing this, we build resilience and emotional agility. This is about emotional agility. Can I look at a situation and find solutions and find, um, uh, stronger outcomes? Can I do that? And so it's a fork in the road. Whenever we come to the fork in the road, we have two paths that we can take. So some of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute now, my judge has gotten me to where I am. I've been whipping myself with this rubber hose for years, and I've achieved in my career, and I've done these great things. And here's the thing. Negative emotions are part of the human experience. We're not trying to say that negative emotions don't have a place. They absolutely do. But if you think about how long, so let's think about this. If you had your hand on this stove, this is your hand here, and your hand is on the stove, how long would you leave it on there? How long would you leave it on? Anybody? I don't
If
think you
you
have to have any.
if you
Oh, go
didn't
ahead.
have the judge, you mean?
No, just if you had your hand on the stove, just you walk up to your stove, you see that it's red, you pop your hand on it. How long would you leave it on?
Not long.
Not long. Well, that's how long negative emotions are good for. And I always say that negative emotions are like a smoke detector. When the smoke detector goes off, you don't look at it and be like, oh, look at that. Well, that's interesting. And you just listen to it and you look at it. When the smoke detector goes off, you're like, well, is my house burning? I need to get up and I need to do something, right? So think of your negative emotions as an alert. They're good as an alert. They're telling you, hey, maybe I need to check in. Maybe I need to do something. Maybe I need to, explore something. But you're not going to leave your hand on a hot stove this long, and you wouldn't leave your smoke detector on for a week either. So think about that when you think about how long you're holding on to a negative emotion. Because I can promise you, and this is the name of a really great book, The Body Keeps Score. The Body Keeps Score is actually a fantastic book that talks about how we hold negative emotion in our body and what our body does in response to that. So yeah, think about that.
Alicia,
Yeah,
just want to call out kind of an interesting question
please.
from Karen in the chat, asking with respect to the hyper rational focusing too much on data, how do you balance between increasing focus on data so that there is the right balance between data and human connection?
Yeah,
Interesting
yeah, that's a
question.
great question. Yeah, so the way to know that if you're operating out of your hyper rational is if you have negative emotions. So that's the first thing. Because there's nothing wrong with the rational side of this, and there's nothing wrong with data, right? So if you look at all those saboteurs that have hyper in front of them, just remove the hyper and that other side of it, and whether you're focused on data or whether you're focused on achievement or whether you're focused on vigilance, there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so the way to find that balance is to check in with your emotion and operate from a place of being rational. And so if you have taken the assessment and you're interested in knowing more about the opposite side of this and what the key areas or the strengths and the key areas of coaching are, just send me an email and I'll be happy to share that with you. So yeah, you'd operate out of a rational side of your thinking, and if you're having a trouble getting over there, you would use some of the key areas of coaching to get yourself there. But yeah, there's always a way to find a balance, but the first thing is to check in with your emotion. Am I in negative emotion? Because you could be operating out of the rational side and it's not a problem at all. Yeah. Thank you for the question, Karen. It's a great question. Did that address your question?
Yeah, and you see organizations, like Accenture, they seem like they're focusing more on data. Um, but what I got from this conversation is, what is the data telling us about what increased human connection we need to have?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah, and all of this is about us, again, knowing more about ourselves so that we can have those human connections. We already talked about the self-command muscle. We started this at the beginning of the presentation. I'm going to teach you a couple of others. These are the ways to address the micro moments when you have a spike of negative emotion. I can send you a resource for a more extended session, a 5-minute and a 15-minute session, but I'll show you a couple of others. So these are, again, 10 seconds, and these are called PQ reps. Positive intelligence is called PQ. All right, so you're going to put your two fingertips together, and this is not Apple's way to take a picture or turn the phone, turn the alarm off. If you've seen that commercial, I'm like, what is Shazad going to do? Shazad is the founder of this work because this PQ rep is one of the ones that he's kind of founded this work with. So you're just going to put the two fingertips together, and again, notice the weight of yourself on your seat. You might close your eyes if that's available to you, taking your attention to the center of where the two fingertips are touching, and you're just going to rub the two fingertips together in a way where you're noticing the ridges on the fingertips, on both fingertips. So separately notice the ridges on the index finger and then notice the ridges on the thumb. And you do this for about 10 seconds. So this is the same thing that we did at the start of the call where you put the palms together. This is just another technique. We're going to do the last one here really quickly. We'll do the last one here really quickly. Again, taking your attention to yourself on your seat. Close your eyes if that's available to you. Now you're going to take your attention to the bottom of your feet. Notice the texture and the temperature of whatever the bottom of your feet are touching. Is it a sock? Is it a shoe? Is it a surface? Whatever it is, just take your attention to the bottom of your feet. Now I want you to wiggle your toes. And you're wiggling your toes in a way where you're checking in with every single one of those toes, like a roll call. Toe number one, toe number two. You're just checking in with each one and you're wiggling your toes. Now, the nice thing about this is you can do this while you're on a Zoom call. You can put the palms together while you're on a Zoom call. This one might be a little something if you're standing in front of somebody, but all of these are ways to calm the mind chatter, just wiggling those toes. All right, so you can come on back. So each one of these, for the micro moments where you notice a spike in negative emotion, this is the self-command. How can I create some space for myself between the stimulus and the response? The thing that's just happened and the way that I respond to it, calm the mind chatter down with one of these techniques. And this is the self-command muscle. 10 seconds, PQ reps. I'll send you the resource. Actually, let me just get that really quickly here. I'll send you the resource for the extended session. You can always do an extended session of this too. If you've got a real thing that's happening that you really want to get out in front of, you can do a 5-minute or a 15-minute one. All right. So the third thing is the sage perspective that every outcome or circumstance can be turned into a gift and opportunity. And this starts off with what's called the stallion story. And it gives us an opportunity to see as we look at things, how we can view them. So I'm going to read that to you. There was once a farmer in ancient China who owned a horse. You are so lucky, his neighbors cried. To own a horse, to pull your cart for you. Maybe. Who knows what is good and what is bad, the farmer said. One day he didn't latch the gate properly and the horse ran off. Oh no! What a disaster, his neighbors cried. Such a terrible misfortune. Maybe. Who knows what is good and what is bad, the farmer replied. A few days later, the horse returned, bringing with it 6 wild horses. How fantastic! You are so lucky, his neighbors told him. Now you're rich. Maybe. Who knows what is good and what is bad, the farmer replied. The following week, the farmer's son was breaking in one of the wild horses when it kicked out and broke his leg. Oh no, his neighbors cried. Such bad luck all over again. Maybe. Who knows what is good and what is bad, the farmer replied. The next day, soldiers came and took away all the young men to fight the war. The farmer's son was left behind. You are so lucky, his neighbors cried. Maybe. Who knows what is good and what is bad, the farmer replied. Whenever we interpret a situation as being a problem or an opportunity, it shapes the way we feel, which shapes the way we respond. The story of the Taoist farmer shows us we can never know how a situation is going to turn out. There are no intrinsic opportunities or problems. There is only what happens and how we choose to respond. So, if you think about that story, what's one thing you might remember from it? What's one thing you might remember as you're looking at your
Oh, and
team and
how
things are
we
going off
look
the
at things.
rails? Yeah, yeah, how we look at things. What about you, Chris?
I was going to say it's actually one of my favorite little stories or parables or whatever you might call it. And for me, I always think about how we never have the full context,
We
right? And we can't have the full context, and so I find that useful.
Yeah. Yeah. We just can't possibly know all the things. We can't know all the things. And so when we can hold the perspective of who knows what is good and what is bad, and I'm hoping you'll remember that. Maybe it's a little bit of an earworm, who knows what is good and what is bad, and it'll stick with you as you look at your teams and you notice that negative spike that's happening for yourself, that negative emotion spike. You could say to yourself, well, who knows what's good and what's bad here? This actually helps you to hold your team with more grace because you can look at something and be like, oh, this is horrible. Really? Who knows what is good and what is bad? So, which perspective is true? Saboteur says it's bad, the sage says it's a gift, and the answer is whichever you believe is what you can create. Whichever you believe is what you can create. So this is a really simple operating system. If you're feeling negative emotions, stop. You're in saboteur mode. Do some PQ reps, whether it's this, whether it's this, whether it's feet on the floor, that micro moment, or one of the things that I'll send you as a resource. And assume the sage perspective. Every problem can have a gift and opportunity to it. Is it a gift of knowledge? Is there something I need to learn here? Is it a gift of power? Do I need to grow for myself? Empathy, curiosity, grace, or is the gift of inspiration? Yeah, you can generate the gift really by checking in with yourself and approaching things with a clear, calm, laser focused approach. So think about this for yourself as you're going into your organizations. The way to know how you could be in best service to your client is to apply your own mask first, right? Because the reality is that you bring your stuff to your work, right? And so when I understand my stuff better, I can turn it down so it's not triggering for other people. So this idea of applying your own mask first is super important. So we talked about this concept of positive intelligence. Where does it come from? What's the theory? The practical application of it. How do I do this? These micro moments when I notice negative emotion happening for myself. How do I turn the mind chatter down? And then we talked a bit about this concept of the sage perspective. How can I look at this as a gift and opportunity? How can I explore the idea that I really don't know what's good and what's bad here? And so, if you had a takeaway from this, what might it be? What might be something that you're taking away in your to go bag from this session or for what you just learned? Anybody want to share? What's a takeaway? Mm, I love the oxygen mask being part of your values. That's great. Anybody have a takeaway? Will you remember the farmer's parable? Will you remember the behaviors of uh, the leader in agile transformation and how their saboteurs might be showing up? Maybe you'll remember how those participants show up, and you'll have some grace for them to know that just like you have your top three, so do they. So do they. Yeah.
So I will share that, the micro moments, it's so much akin to, meditation. I'm in
It
a
is.
meditation community, and I've been in the community for like 20 years, and you're still working on it. So it is a lifelong
Absolutely.
journey that
Yes, it
never
is.
ends, yet is rewarding.
Yes, thank you for that, Karen. It really is. And, as she mentioned, these basically are mindfulness practices, meditative practices. But while you're in the middle of a meeting and someone has just said the thing that now has your blood pressure spiking, you may not be able to get into a lotus pose right there in the meeting, right? So these little micro moments of bringing your palms together or getting your fingertips together are something you can do in the action. You know what I mean? Because the lotus pose isn't accessible in this moment. And so how can I wiggle my toes? How can I bring my mind chatter down so that I can respond in a way that I don't have to apologize for later, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
alert. If you see everybody in the meeting going like this, you
Right?
need to
Yeah,
like lean
right?
into that, right? And
Lean
say,
into it, right? Yeah. Yeah. You can get curious about it. Yeah. Yeah. So true.
I've for sure been
Anybody
in
else?
meetings where if everyone was aware of that, all but one person would be doing this, right? So I actually, Alicia, I would love to thank you for the reminder of these different sort of saboteurs, because I think it's easy to assume that other people struggle with the same saboteurs. Like I'm a people pleaser, right? And so I assume that that must be everybody's challenge. So having the
Great
list
point.
means it can go when I'm helping or I'm trying to approach a new idea or change, to refer back to the list and be like, okay, what other saboteurs do I need to speak to in this conversation to help people like pause for a minute and reframe?
Absolutely. That's a really great point. And in his book, I have
This
a
is
copy
this
of
is
the book here.
Suruchi Alicia.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry to interrupt you.
that's okay.
So, a quick takeaway for me is being self-aware about your own sabotage is really important, and how to deal with that is kind of a great homework you can do um, when handling or dealing with any situation. So, as I mentioned in the chat, having the list of saboteurs, having that assessment, and of course, TED Talk was really helpful.
Oh,
So
good.
this is going to be a great asset while dealing with the situations, and being aware of your own saboteurs rather than, I mean, of course, everyone has their own saboteurs, but let's start from ourselves and crack the day.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Such an important point. You know, we can be more effective, have greater outcomes and impact when we come in with the understanding of ourselves and how we can really support other people, because they're going through, the difference between you and the person that you're working with is that you have the saboteur patterns of thinking. You may know about them. They don't. They're just getting whipped around by their thoughts. And so, yeah, we can have grace for that. We can have empathy for that. I was just going to say quickly that in his book, between pages 41 and 49, all the saboteurs are described there. And so, to Kathleen's point, it's important to kind of know how those other saboteurs, how they might show up. And then in this presentation, you can see how change can affect the behavior of the different saboteurs. And so that can be super helpful too. Um, so on this slide, you've got the link. There's a QR code right under the book that takes you right to the book. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. The other QR code over here on the right is to a brochure for a program that I have. I lead a 6-week program about 4 times a year, where it's an immersive program. It's a deep dive into this work, and it goes beyond what's in the book. It goes beyond what you can get in coaching. It's app based, and you have access to it for an entire year after you go through the 6-week program. And it's daily practice and a PQ gym and a community, a global community. And so if you're interested in hearing anything more about that, you're welcome to click on that link, or just send me an email. You can send me an email too, and I'll tell you. I've got another one coming up in February. I always save a spot for former military or active duty military, first responders, law enforcement. I always save actually a complimentary spot for those folks. And for my next February session, I already have those 2 spots filled, but I do have a couple of spots open for that February program. And it has been life-changing for people to have this work available to them. So you have those resources if those would be a support for you. Let's see what else here. Oh, so a couple of resources that I'll send over. Oh, if you'd like to connect on LinkedIn, that QR code takes you right to my LinkedIn profile. I would love to connect with you, and you're welcome to reach out that way too. And I'll send a couple of resources over. There's another TED Talk by Heather Lanier, Good and Bad are Incomplete Stories We Tell Ourselves. That's a good one. And has anybody ever heard of My Stroke of Insight? I forget the name of the woman that is the Janet Bolton, I think it is. She's a scientist, and she actually has a stroke and loses her whole left brain. And so she talks about that whole experience. And so it really supports this idea of left brain and right brain and kind of what the 2 jobs are and that kind of thing. I'll send that over as well. And then an article on emotional agility and a book excerpt. I'll send those things over to you as well. Now, Chris, how might I get these resources to people?
I was gonna recommend what's a good way for people to contact you that you could drop in the chat easily? Is it an email? Is it a link?
Yeah. Let me do that now.
I just dropped your LinkedIn link in there, but yeah,
thank
there
you.
might be a more direct, better way.
Okay. Yeah, no, LinkedIn is great. I use LinkedIn a lot. So if anybody wants to go directly to, oh yeah, that's the book, My Stroke of Insight. Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah, so if you want to go directly to LinkedIn, that's really a great way to connect, and I'll be happy to share these resources with you. So that's it, folks. Thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for your engagement, your participation, and being open to the idea that, when we come into agile transformation, it's not just about what's going on with everybody else. We have a role to play, and we bring these things to our transformation. And hopefully, what you learned in this session are ways that you can really get out in front of that and support yourself and your clients by being aware of what's going on for you. So thank you. It's been my honor to be of service. Hopefully, you found something interesting.
Yay. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I seem to recall that you had shared with me that if people do go out and take those assessments and want to reach out to you with their results, that you might have some useful insights that you could
Yes.
share back with them. So
Yes.
for those who are interested, by all means, right? Don't be shy about that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.